Hello, everyone. Can you see my infinity screen and hear me? How's everyone doing? All right, very cool. Well, welcome. Hopefully, have better luck here than last week. Hopefully, you guys have been having a great week. Why don't, as I kind of cue things up a little bit today, tell me what are you guys working on in class? What's going on? What book are you studying? What concepts are you working on? See if I can make some connections to what you guys are doing. Additionally, anything that you have questions about. So go ahead and just at what you're up to. I'm going to just scroll up to the top and remind you that I've posted our poem for today. We are continuing to work on poetry and the poetry prompt, which is our first prompt as we go into the essay portion of the exam. And what we're going to do pretty much, I think, maybe for 2, 3, 4 more weeks, continue getting some more literary devices, poetic devices in particular, and reading a poem and seeing if we can notice those literary devices being used in the poem, and how do poets use those particular poetic devices to convey meaning. Okay, so as you can see here at the top, there is a link to One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. Okay, she's one of the confessional poets, kind of mid-century, mid-20th century poet. Wrote a lot about kind of personal experiences, personal trauma. And so you can download that ideally. And then we are using our how to read a poem process, which is not the only process, but I've found that it's one that really helps me to get into the poem. So let me scroll down, see what you guys are up to. Okay, Bruno, things fall apart. Okay, yeah, I think a lot of you guys are in the same class. Things fall apart. Okay, very cool. By Achebe. Okay, and I believe you might have been reading Othello before that. So that's pretty amazing. Do you have any concepts that you are kind of using, or a lens that you're using in particular as this text? What are you looking for, as you read a work of literature? Okay, so motifs. Okay, yeah, of fire, of yams, maybe. Motif, symbol, structure, and the tragic hero. Very cool. What kind of definitions of tragic hero are you guys looking at? Sacrifice. Okay. Very cool. Postcolonial lens is really cool to look at this through. Achebe being one of the pioneers of the postcolonial lens, both in his fiction and in his nonfiction writing. Okay, foil and characterization. Cool. So Conquest one flaw is that he is driven by fear. Okay, so sort of tragic flaw concept there. Symbolism. Yep. Justice and justice. That's kind of a theme. All right. Those are all good things. Symbol of fire. All right. Yeah. So, I mean, what we're doing here is not really divorced from any of what you're doing with your novels. What you're doing is you're looking at literary elements, and there's a lot of overlap between poetry and novels, prose, and how do writers use those things to convey meaning. And so very similar kind of way of looking at things. Tragic hero is a little bit different in the sense that you're bringing sort of a theory to the table. Clash of Cultures, that's a good one that actually relates pretty well to one of our open prompts. So, a lot of what we're talking about here, we're still talking about the same kind of thinking that you should be doing for your novels. So hopefully you kind of see the connection there. And, as we work on poetry over the course of these next couple weeks, you can still be looking at, okay, so that's how poets use devices or literary elements to convey meaning. Here's how an author uses literary devices to convey meaning. And it's a similar kind of thing that I think is going to really serve you well in terms of using these novels. Okay, so if we're sounding good, I think I've shared my screen because the infinity screen is up and running. I'm going to switch over to my slides and I'm going to check back every now and again, but we are looking at OneArt. So if you haven't downloaded that, do get that up and running, and hopefully you've had a chance to look at it. Okay, so today, part 4, we're going to be talking about, actually this is more figurative language. I kind of called the first one I think it was actually part 2, figurative language. Really, we've been doing figurative language the last 3 weeks. The first week we did some of the more traditional things we consider figurative language: simile, metaphor, apostrophe, personification, synecdoche, metonymy. Okay, some of the more traditional ones, some that we've actually been talking about for years. Last week we talked about symbolism, and we looked at road not taken, and that being a big symbol because actually it is there, it is literally there, but it also seems to suggest meanings beyond the thing. Part 4 is also figurative language, and figurative language is just saying something different than what you mean. And so paradox, hyperbole, which is a overstatement, understatement, and irony, I think, is a good grouping of figurative language. And this will be our last little stop with figurative language. At this point, you'll have quite a few things I think you can point to in this sort of overarching umbrella of figurative language. So every time, I like to just remind you what you're going to encounter in May. I believe it's the first Thursday in May. 1 hour, you're going to have multiple choice, 55 multiple choice questions, 1/2 prose, 1/2 poetry, 1/2 older, 1/2 modern. And then you have a 10-minute break. You come back in for the free response questions. And we're working on the first free response question, which is the poetry prompt. The second one is the prose prompt, which is very, very similar. It's just going to be a prose passage, an excerpt from a novel or short story. And then the open prompt. And this is why you're reading Things Fall Apart. This is why you're reading great works of literature, is because you have to answer this kind of open-ended thematic question about something, and you have to choose one of the works of literature that you've read, see if you can get it to answer that question. Okay, we are going to do OneArt by Elizabeth Bishop, and if you haven't already, there is the link if you want to open that up. We're going to be talking about that in a moment, but before we do, I'd like to remind you about the how to read a poem process that we're using. First of all, enjoyment. I think it's so important just to, what do you like, what do you not like? And we'll figure out a little bit later why. You know, maybe there is a reason for you're liking or not liking something, but you can't allow your feelings to be out of this. Just because we're doing something analytically doesn't mean that you shouldn't trust some of your feelings here. Meaning, this can be looking up words, certainly, and kind of paraphrasing things, but also it's very relevant to figurative language, because figurative language usually means something other than whatever it is that we're talking about. Structure and language, I kind of pair these two together. They are unrelated, but I think that they go well together. And structure is anything related to the form, structure of the sentences, basically the shape of the poem on the page. I could do structure even without knowing the language that it's written in. Language relates to the formality or informality of the language. Is there slang? Is there foreign language being used? What can you say about the characteristic quality of the language? Mood and tone. So, you know, I use emojis of various types. And then a lot of times I like tone. Tone is not emotion. It's a little bit different than mood. It's the way that mood is expressed. And then I like to do a body paragraph. I don't do timed writing for every single time, but I will do a thesis and a body paragraph. And I just get in the habit of being able to write something about the text, being able to answer the prompt. And I think that's one of the better ways of doing it. And then every now and again doing a timed writing where you do a full-fledged essay. Let me just get out of here for a second. Make sure that you're all here. Are we all still hearing me? Can someone just say yes? For some reason, I freak out and wonder if anyone is there. Sweet. Okay, great. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will come back in a little bit. All right, so let's talk about each of these things. Paradox, it is an apparent contradiction that is nevertheless somehow true. And so a couple things about this. What seemed impossible is actually plausible and not strange at all. Usually arises due to one of the words being used figuratively or in more than one sense. And sometimes the value of paradox is its shock value, kind of an unexpected realization that we somehow capture in this apparent contradiction. A couple examples of this. Alexander Pope has the famous phrase, damn with faint praise. How could you do that? It seems like praising and damning wouldn't be in the same sentence. And yet, if I faintly praise you, in some sense, I truly do condemn you or say something negative about you if I just have faint praise for you. So an apparent contradiction. Hamlet, I must be cruel to be kind. And we know that, certain situations demand that. Hamlet's situation is very extreme. And he is in this situation where he expresses paradoxically, I must be cruel in order to be kind to the people that I love. Wordsworth, child is father of the man. How's that possible? That's not possible biologically. And yet, in a certain sense, in a romantic sense, we learn from children. Children have more to teach us than do adults have to teach children. So it's kind of this like reversal that Wordsworth wants to capture in this poem. It's almost paradoxical, and yet there is some truth to it, the wisdom of children. In Dickens, it was the best of time, it was the worst of time. Seems like those two things couldn't go in the same box, and yet it was a crazy time. It was a time where both of those could coexist in a certain sense, perhaps in a paradoxical sense, but nonetheless in a true sense. Moving on to hyperbole, that is exaggeration in the service of truth. It is not the same as a fish story, like telling, I caught this enormous fish. No, it adds emphasis to what you really mean. And effects can be numerous. They can be humorous, they can be grave, fanciful, restrained, convincing, unconvincing. Really have to kind of see how it's being used. On the flip side, actually, let me give you some examples of this. One example, Macbeth. He says, actually, after he kills the king, Neptune's ocean wash this blood clean from my hand? No, this my hand will rather the multitudinous seas in Cardine, making the green one red. So he's basically saying all of the seas, the oceans could not wash my bloody hands clean. In fact, my hands would make the seas bloody. And obviously that would be impossible. And yet it shows his profound guilt that he feels, that he will never be free of this guilt. He will never be clean of this guilt. Okay, on the flip side of that is understatement, saying less than one means. Catcher in the Rye, I have to have this operation. It isn't very serious. I have this tiny little tumor on the brain. Obviously very serious, and yet you kind of pick up on his tone, his kind of an ironic tone. If you know Holden Caulfield, this is kind of a tone that he keeps up for the entire time, and yet later on in the book we realize he is quite vulnerable. But in some ways, this understatement that he uses almost makes that even more painful. Romeo and Juliet, Benvolio, this is after Mercutio has been stabbed. He's received a mortal wound. Benvolio says, what, art thou hurt? Aye, a scratch. It's way more than a scratch. He's going to be dead in a couple minutes. So that shows a little bit of actually both of those characters' personality. Mercutio, Holden Caulfield, you see kind of that tendency toward irony that they have. So segue into irony, which is a contrast between expectations and reality. We have verbal irony, saying the opposite of what you mean. Now, this is distinct from sarcasm. Sarcasm is the mean kind of a verbal irony. So sarcasm comes literally from the Greek word meaning to tear flesh. It is bitter or cutting speech intended to wound, to hurt someone. So I could say, wow, you guys really aced that quiz or whatever, and I actually mean that y'all bombed it. That would be sarcasm. That would be mean. But I could say, wow, you guys really bombed that quiz, when I actually meant you guys all aced it. And that would be verbal irony. It would not be sarcasm, because actually I'm saying something nice. But verbal irony is either of those, going in either direction. But sarcasm is the negative one. Situational irony is a discrepancy between the actual circumstances and what would seem appropriate, or between what anticipates and what actually happens. Okay, so we have a lot of examples of this in literature. I think one of the more, oh shoot, I'm drawing a blank on this, but the O. Henry story where the woman buys her husband, cuts off her hair so that her husband can have a watch chain, and the husband sells or pawns the watch so that she can have some nice combs for her hair. And then, of course, the situational irony is at the end, when they present one another with these presents, neither of them has what it was intended for. And so that was situationally ironic. Dramatic irony. Now, this is in drama when someone up on stage doesn't know something that the audience knows. Good example of this is Oedipus the king. He doesn't know that he's killed his father and married his mother, but we know. And it creates this tension. Now, in poetry, a lot of people say that dramatic irony is a discrepancy between what the speaker is voicing and what is actually meant. So you could maybe imagine a poem possibly where someone is like singing the praises of war, but it's very clear that the poem is actually an anti-war poem. Okay, but we give a speaker to kind of express a certain view, and we almost like have a different view that is implicitly conveyed. And we're actually going to see an example of that today. So if that doesn't quite make sense, there is kind of a poetic example of dramatic irony. Okay, just a reminder about the poetry prompt in a nutshell. The question is always, how do poets use poetic techniques to convey meaning? And remember, there are lots of different ways this can be expressed, but basically it's the same pattern every single time, and you should get comfortable kind of underlining these things, seeing these things, and then making sure to answer the question that they're asking. Okay. All right. I did create annotations in a body paragraph for you. I'm going to go through this rather quickly and then give you guys a chance to give me some, ask me some questions. This is the URL. Actually, as I X out of this, let me just copy this, and I'll put it into the stream so that you guys can click on it and get these annotations. And then I've done a body paragraph for you. Okay, here's a good question by Naya. The difference between a paradox and an oxymoron. Okay, so oxymoron is much shorter. A lot of times it's a pairing of two words, and I'm trying to think, again, I'm drawing a blank on this. It's a little bit different. Okay, let me get juxtaposition next. So it is a juxtaposition, a setting side by side of two words that should seem like they shouldn't go well together. Jumbo shrimp, yeah. That is, actually I've heard that is not. I'm trying to think what. Oh goodness, you've caught me. Military intelligence is one that I've heard. That's a joke. Two words that shouldn't go together. Let me think about that. Let me get a couple good examples of that. But anyways, oxymoron is a very short, two words in close succession that seem like they really shouldn't go together. Deafening silence. There we go. Yep, that's a good one. Beautiful disaster. You guys are so smart. Yep. Those are definitely some. Beautiful loser maybe might even be an oxymoron, possibly. Pretty ugly. Maybe, although, Bruno, the meaning of pretty here is not beautiful. It's somewhat. So you can have these kind of like playing with language because English has so many different denotations for their words. Yeah, tragic beauty, I think might be a good one, possibly, where those two words really don't seem like they should go together. It definitely has a lot in common with paradox. Paradox is a kind of a larger thing, one that might unfold over, a sentence or even over a larger period. Okay, juxtaposition. Yeah, Naya's smart. Juxtaposition is just putting things side by side, literally. It is a good word to use when talking about literature. Juxtaposing, elements, and a lot of time maybe contrasting elements. Let's see if we can use that. Let's see if we can use juxtaposition as we discuss this poem. Okay, let's go over to the poem. If you guys, the model response, let me read it first. And let's read the prompt too. So this was 1980. And the prompt was write an essay in which you describe how the speaker's attitude toward loss in lines 16 through 19 is related to her attitude toward loss in lines 1 through 15, using specific references to the text. Show how verse form and language contribute to the reader's understanding of these attitudes. Okay, kind of a weird question in the sense that they want us to show this contrast between lines 1 through 15 and lines 16 through 19, that they're basically implying there was a shift that occurred there that we should pick up on. There's a difference between the first part of the poem and the second part of the poem. And then notice that they did mention verse form and language, so we can potentially use that, or we can decide to use something else of our own. Okay, let me read this to you. And actually, why don't you tell me a little bit in the comments what you like and not like, because that's the first reading. Okay, the first reading is enjoyment. One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day, except the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice losing farther, losing faster, places and names and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last or next to last of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones and vaster, some realms I own, 2 rivers, a continent. I missed them, but it wasn't a disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love, I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing's not too hard to master, though it may look like, write it, like disaster. Okay. Would you like, would you not like? See if we can make anything of this poem. All right. Paradox, contradiction, often I have ideas, juxtapose, often opposing. Okay. Yeah, those are some good ideas about oxymoron, juxtaposition. What'd you like? Anyone want to chime in on what you like about this poem? What'd you not like about this poem? Any parts stuck out to you? The utter truth is disturbing. I like the verbal irony. Yeah, there definitely does seem to be some verbal irony. I like that she kept repeating the same sentence at the end of each stanza. Yeah, it's actually a form. We're going to be talking about that here in a second because it is a verse form like a sonnet. I love the write it. Yeah, I mean, it's so awkward and yet it's so cool. Anything else? Anything that you, how about anyone not like something? She has a very strong voice. Anything irritate you about the poem or anything kind of rub you the wrong way about the poem? How she has to force herself to say it aloud. Yeah, there is kind of a forced tone to it at various points. I don't know if you pick up on it, but it goes from having a pretty good flow to being kind of halting and awkward. Okay, let's go to some of my annotations. And again, this is very messy, but I'm going to see if I can walk through this with you. So don't mind the mess. Okay, here we go. So we're over here. And all right, so first of all, let me just say what I liked. I like this mixture of end stopped and enjambed lines. So first of all, we have an end stop line, which ends with a punctuation or kind of a natural stopping point. We have a period stopping point, and then we have this nice enjambed line, which is a really good thing to notice. It's one of my favorite things to notice structurally is that there's kind of a carryover into the next line. And it can do a lot of things, but I think it can show kind of it can show an exasperation, it can show an intensity, it can show some trauma, I think, at various points. But I do like the mixture of it. Don't know what to make of it at this point, but I liked it. You can see the part that I didn't like as I read this. This last stanza is hard to read. It is just literally hard to read. It's awkward to read. And so that was a not like. Okay, so I'm going to move on to some of the meaning related things that I saw. And so the first one that I saw was right here, hyperbole, where she starts talking about obviously these absurdly large things that she's lost: cities, realms, rivers, continents. This is exaggeration. She hasn't lost any of these things, and it does have a humorous effect. But when you kind of think about it in light of loss, you're beginning to wonder, why are we talking about this? Why are you kind of harping on this? There's other elements that are actually making me feel something is beneath the surface here. So I'm going to let her off the hook with this. It's kind of humorous, but at the same time, I'm kind of like inquiring into what is the source of this humor. And then there's this persistent understatement. The art of losing isn't hard to master. It's one of the hardest things to master. Grief is difficult. It's one of the most difficult things that we encounter as human beings. And it's not a disaster. I mean, actually, when she lists off some of these more hyperbolic things, it's like that would be a major disaster. And yet there's a nice juxtaposition of hyperbole and understatement. And that gets more and more pronounced as the poem goes on. I'm going to give you an example of dramatic irony here. This is the dramatic irony that we see in poetry, where she seems to express, I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing is not hard to master. I think she is having trouble with mastering it, that it is hard to master, that it is a disaster, and that even though she's not expressing that, that is truly the meaning of this poem. The underlying meaning of this poem is becoming clear. A couple more things. I do think continuing on understatement, even as we're talking about this you, which does seem to be a romantic you, she's making these understatements about it and becoming less and less convincing about it. I do think that there's a paradox here. The write it, and I do ask my students every now and again, what do you think the write it means? I'm just going to share with you that I do think that part of her message here is that loss is a source of art, writing, poetry, and this poem that she has just written came out of this experience of loss, and it almost kind of harkens back to the title, which is One Art. That there is something about loss that goes hand in hand with art and poetry and writing. Want to touch on a couple things that are a little bit further on in our readings. First of all, this is a Villanelle. It is a 19-line poem, 5 tercets and a quatrain. First and third lines recur alternately at the end of the other tercets, and both are repeated at the close of the concluding quatrain. So you see, the art of losing isn't hard to master. The art of losing isn't hard to master. The art of losing isn't hard to master. The art of losing is not too hard to master. She's changing it a little bit. It's not supposed to be changed, but it is a more modern poem, so you're allowed to do that. To be lost that their loss is no disaster. None of these will bring disaster, but it wasn't a disaster. And then at the end, like disaster. So these are supposed to, in the original French, be repeated exactly. It's actually kind of a fun poem to write, because when you're done with the first tercet, you can actually kind of populate the later stanzas and then just figure out what you're going to write for lines 1 and 2 in each of those. So it's kind of an interesting poem, because it's supposed to be perfect, and yet this is one of the things that you will notice is that as time goes on, it starts to break down. It breaks down more and more and more. It's supposed to be perfect, and I have this little point here that we see increasing enjambment, which to me suggests more of a distressed tone. Down here, the refrain, which is supposed to be perfect, is breaking down. And actually, I think I could talk about some of the sentence structure where we have a dash, we have a parenthesis, we have 2 parentheses actually, and we have all these troubled syntax related things. So the sentences themselves are sort of distressed, and so it kind of implies this tone of distress. Talking about a couple things related to language. This whole first part of the poem, she's in the imperative mood where she says, lose something every day. Like it's kind of like a motivational speech to you, whoever that is, you know, this implied you. Try it out. Accept the fluster of lost door keys. And in some ways it implies some confidence and some expertise, but also sort of distancing oneself in the beginning there. There is some tone that is implied by getting into this imperative mood is what it's called. Now she starts to get more personal, even though she keeps it at a distance, first person. And then she brings in this second person, but it's not the imperative mood anymore. It's a you. And that you, as I mentioned before, does seem to be kind of a romantic you, someone she has lost, someone who has left her. And there is some vulnerability that is conveyed in this last stanza. Okay? I like this chant, and it's evident. Seems overly proper, and actually chant is in some ways obsolete. We don't use it that much anymore. It feels very stiff, unconvincing, and forced. So basically I'm picking up on she is trying to pretend like she's super confident, but she is totally suffering. She is suffering from this loss of whoever this person is, okay? And she is not over it. All right, although there is some hope here in the sense that she got a poem out of it, so that's good. Let me go to my thesis and the paragraph that I wrote, and then I'll just let you guys ask whatever questions you have. My thesis is basically similar to the prompt, even though I didn't like the prompt, so I'm going to kind of tweak it a little bit. In one art, Elizabeth Bishop uses structure, figurative language, and point of view to reveal her changing attitude toward loss. And I'm going to really emphasize 1 through 15, verses 16 through 19. This would be my second body paragraph. So my first body paragraph was about structure. Second one would be about figurative language. So pretending like I'm starting here after my first paragraph. In addition to structure, Bishop uses figurative language such as overstatement, understatement, and paradox to dramatize her emerging feelings surrounding loss. For one, Bishop employs increasingly absurd amounts of hyperbole in describing the kinds of losses she has experienced. And here's my example. For instance, after describing more pedestrian losses like her door keys, the hour badly spent, and her mother's watch, she lists increasingly improbable lost possessions: 2 cities, some realms I own, 2 rivers, a continent. My second detail and example contrasting with these exaggerated examples of loss are the insistent understatements that the art of losing isn't hard to master and that loss is no disaster. The combination, how about let's say juxtaposition, the juxtaposition of these contrasting elements creates a dramatically ironic effect wherein the speaker's assertions begin to sound increasingly hollow. In the last stanza, when the speaker declares, "I shan't have lied," and it's evident these statements ring false. The discrepancy between what the speaker says and clearly feels is painfully apparent. She is unable to get over the loss of her beloved. Final detail. Finally, Bishop ends the poem with an implied paradox. The insertion of the parenthetical "write it" in the poem's final line suggests that this terrible loss is not without merit. Alluding to the title of the poem, Bishop suggests that loss, though painful, is the source of art, writing, and indeed the poem she has just written. This paradox is so central to the creative process that she dubs the poem "one art," as though loss and grief are perhaps art's singular origin. And my wrap sentence, in summary, Bishop uses figurative language to progressively reveal the speaker's underlying attitudes toward loss. Okay, that's my body paragraph. Let me pop over here and see if you guys have any questions or comments about this. Any questions or comments? You guys still there? All right, let's see. Let's go back a little bit here. Okay. Changes halfway through, yes. Agree with Tamara. By repeating the same sentence at the end, it grabs the reader's attention. As far as the tone of the Bishop grabs reader's attention. No, I agree that kind of brings itself to the reader's attention. I'm going to kind of put in a little bit of a pointer here. They really could care less about the reader. What they want to know about is how does it convey the speaker's attitude. So I kind of tell my students over and over again, we don't know what the reader is feeling. Now, I know this prompt makes mention of the reader, but it's more about what Bishop achieves, okay, in terms of conveying that attitude of the speaker, okay? So try to get in the habit of really substituting in statements about what does it convey about the speaker's attitude or the speaker's state of mind as often as you can. Okay, I'm running out of time on my computer. Would talking about losing as something positive be a paradox? I think you could definitely say that. I think it is a paradox, and I think we all have had some experience of that paradox in a more serious sense that, you know, loss is never fun. And yet I think sometimes it helps us to grow as human beings. Sometimes we would say, you know, that loss is good for us in a certain sense, even though it's not good. Okay. She didn't literally lose cities, continents, etc. Yeah, I do think that was not probably the case, but it did seem like she made a transition from things that are more probable to things that are almost impossible. Okay. More able to relate and connect with the speakers. Yeah, she starts out with some more pedestrian or more, you know, down to earth type of things so that we can get up to this higher, more improbable level. I definitely think that this is meant to be kind of humorous, Sebastian. I agree with that. There does seem to be something of a humorous tone in the beginning. I think you could definitely characterize the tone as being humorous. And it almost makes the pain even more powerful in some ways. I think when you have that humor, when someone is trying to be humorous, but it's clear that they're kind of covering up pain. They're doing it because they're experiencing pain. Okay, and then so let's see, anything else? Humor to seem if she were in denial. Absolutely, I think that is key. Is taking into account the use of second person for this poem. No, I don't think that it is, Stephen, but it's one thing that I think that I might be able to write a paragraph about. If I wanted to kind of show I think I could make a case that the changing point of view actually gives us some insight into the shift that occurs. Okay, so if I'm in an imperative mood and I'm like, yeah, lose something every day, I'm gonna teach you a thing or two about loss. I'm good at loss. You have something of a confidence. It's a very brittle confidence I think we pick up on as time goes on. Gets into the first person, becomes a little bit more personal. And then it gets into that last stanza when the point of view of the second person point of view in that point is not the imperative, it's just you. And it is you singular. And it really does seem to be a beloved, a lover at that point. And the I and the you at that point becomes very vulnerable. It's no longer abstract. It's no longer a joke. It's personal. And so, Stephen, I'm not sure if that's going to be one that you're going to end up being comfortable with, but I think that I could write a paragraph about that. And I like keeping an eye on that. We saw that way back at the whipping, if you remember that the point of view was one of the ways that we could really track what was happening in the poem and his shifting attitude. Okay. Okay, cool. Glad to hear that. Do you guys have any other questions? I'm pretty much done. I would let me just flip over here one last minute. Just make sure, I believe we're getting to the deadline for signing up. I'd love to have you guys along in November and December and all the way to the exam, and hopefully do super well on the exam. At some point, I don't know if you necessarily have to do it this week, but click the replays and future live sessions, and it is going to be a subscription service, I think, by the end of October. But I'd love to have you on board, and I believe that it's going to be quite a bit cheaper at the beginning. It's obviously free right now, but if you get in early, I believe that that's going to be quite a bit cheaper, and you can get all of the Fiveable AP classes. Okay, so I just want to remind you about that is coming up, and would love to have you kind of continue on. I think this is one of the best and one of the cheapest on the market at this point, and hopefully get you a really good score. Okay, my computer's about to die. So I am gonna sign off for now. Let me just see if I can answer this question from Brendan. Would you say that this increase in enjambment was because of her understatement of losing objects, inserting the fact that, like you said, she's having a hard time with grief? I don't know what votes I type. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I was wondering what that was. Anyways, I like to look at them kind of a little bit separately. I don't like to talk personally. This is me. I like to, like eat the different parts of my plate separately. This is just personality, but I think it also lends itself well to body paragraphs. I like to talk about structural things alone, and then I like to talk about figurative language things alone. I do want to kind of talk about how they're all barking up the same tree, that they are revealing this shifting kind of attitude toward loss. Okay, so enjambment to me is a structural thing. I definitely think that that's happening. And then understatement is a figurative language thing. I have to end this broadcast because I'm going to run out of juice, but I'll see you guys all next Monday. Have a great week.